What is going on, YouTube? I wanted to come back with my post-game reaction to the Texas 3-point win over Iowa State this afternoon. Texas gets their third win in a row. Granted, it was also probably their grittiest or toughest win of the season. Whatever way you want to put that, Texas really has to grind it out to get their third win in a row, third one in Big 12 play. Iowa State came to play, and their offense looked better maybe than they did in any other game this season. Like, Texas's defense in the last 2 weeks was playing really well. Held a West Virginia offense that is looking pretty good for the most part this season to 20 points, most of which were scored in the fourth, or like late in that game, fourth quarter, I do believe. And then, really the only team that Iowa State has scored more against in Big 12 play is Baylor. And that was more of a back and forth game, whereas this was a much slower pace game. It was, for Iowa State, it was a little bit more methodical of third down conversions, getting some big time throws out of Hunter Deckers in some important situations, and getting Xavier Hutchinson involved. He did have one obvious drop late in this game that had a huge impact on the outcome, but kind of dig into that here a little bit later. On the Texas side, the offense just did not look as good. Clearly, this was a win where Texas needed to grind it out. Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson carried the load for Texas. And we saw Xavier Worthy was big for this team too. There's no doubt about it. He, on that fourth down play late in the game to give Texas the lead, really just burned that DB on a nice little key route to the outside. Quinn Ewers hit him for the game-winning touchdown. A few of my key takeaways from this game. First, and I just wanted to mention this off the top because this was a controversial ending to the game, and I'll address that best I can. Everyone that was injured in this game, Texas had a few injuries. Iowa State most notably had Hunter Deckers coming up injured late in this game. From what Steve Sarkisian said post-game, sounds like a few of the Texas guys that were injured in this game, Ryan Watts, Jaron Thompson, and then I believe, Hayden Connor, said they were just stingers. So hopefully we see them back next weekend against Oklahoma State. The Hayden Connor injury was late. It was on play late in this game. Ryan Watts had a shoulder injury that he suffered, I believe, in the first half. Jaron Thompson, I don't remember exactly when that happened, but he's a big piece of that secondary. And so having him healthy is key. He's kind of the quarterback back there. So, hopefully all those three guys are ready to go next week. And then on the Iowa State side, the most obvious injury there is Hunter Deckers. However you feel about the call or lack thereof, on that late play, Anthony Cook hitting Hunter Deckers, highly resulting in a fumble that Texas recovered. No targeting call on the play. What I personally saw was that, yes, Anthony Cook hit him with the helmet, but it went into Hunter Deckers' shoulder. I will say ESPN did not have many great angles on that play, and it was hard to take the attention away from RG3 just kind of ranting about the call for about 5-10 minutes. And then when he saw the angle later on, he had said that, that might not look like targeting. Now, targeting is a very, very loosely defined thing as it's enforced in college football and the NFL nowadays. I will say there was a roughing the passer call on Quinn Ewers earlier in the game that I didn't agree with. I didn't think that was roughing the passer, driving him to the ground. I think the hit that Dallas Turner had on him in the Alabama game a few weeks ago was much worse than that one. I don't think that should have been flagged. The Hunter Deckers play, I don't know if it should have been. I would need a better angle on it, and that's where I'm saying it would have been nice if ESPN had some other camera angles that were working on that play, but they really only had one that we got to see. It did look like the ball was coming out before Hunter Deckers' knee hit the ground, so I would agree with the fumble call. And from the angle we got, looked like Anthony Cook hit him in the shoulder. He did lead with helmet. There's no doubt about that. So that was there. But, hit him in the shoulder. Technically, targeting is when someone has a hit on a defensive player, if you want to say with malicious intent, but I don't believe that wording is in the rule book, but it's a hit to the head or neck area of a defensive player. And it doesn't really matter what you use, but like it most commonly, at least the most common enforcement of it is when you're leading with the crown of the helmet. And from the way it looked, I wouldn't doubt that Anthony Cook was leading with the crown of the helmet on that. If he wasn't, then he was still going head first. And so that's not the way that the refs try to enforce that nowadays. But I mean, if it's a hit to the shoulder, also Hunter Dekkers is running on a QB run there. He himself is trying to fight for extra yardage. By the ruling or by the rule book, I don't think he's a defensive player or a defenseless player in that sense. So from the angle we saw, I would tend to agree with the no call and the targeting, but I wouldn't give a conclusive take there, or I would say that is an inconclusive take for me because we didn't have that many angles to see. So I get the frustration from both sides. Looking post game, Texas Twitter, Iowa State Twitter, and just general college football Twitter were, all had various takes. Matt Campbell was obviously very, very fired up. I have not watched his post game press conference yet, but I'm assuming he's very fired up. I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, I hope Hunter Dekkers is okay. He was obviously hurt after the play. And I mean, walking away from the game, I just hope all players are healthy, or at least is to the best of the situation. And so I would hope for that first and foremost for Hunter Dekkers, but also I get why Matt Campbell's defending his player on that. I completely think that is okay. Few other things from the game, because that play obviously made a huge difference. It resulted in Texas getting the football and ultimately sealing the win after a first down run from Roschon Johnson. Building off that, I mentioned earlier that that Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson really carried Texas to this win. One key stat from this game is that the single game rushing yards leader this season against Iowa State was Baylor's Richard Reese. He had about 77 or 78 rushing yards in their game earlier this season. Roschon Johnson goes for 141. He didn't have any touchdowns, but 141 rushing yards on 28 carries, and also finishes with 36 receiving yards on 4 receptions. One of those was a really, really nice, a few of those were really nice catches. One of them was just for a loss, but one of those was a really, really nice catch downfield that got Texas in the red zone. I heard one thing, or saw one thing, I believe, from Ian Boyd of Inside Texas on Twitter, where he was saying that, Bijan Robinson from an NFL comparison perspective looks a little bit like Alvin Kamara. And on that play and a few others in this game, I would agree with that. Bijan Robinson was huge, man. He almost doubled the rushing yard total of any other running back that played Iowa State, or any player for that matter, against Iowa State so far this season. Adrian Martinez and Richard Reese both had over 75 yards. Devin Neal Kansas. Devin Neal is Kansas's running back. Had 75 yards. Roschon Johnson actually in fourth place, or has the fourth most rushing yards of any running back against Iowa State this season, and fifth total among all positions. He had 71. He was also pretty tremendous. He was running over a lot of guys and just was huge in this game. I want to say that's one of the major differences between Texas year over year. Like Bijan Robinson last season, yeah, he was fantastic, but he was just on something else today. The way he was fighting through tackles, making extra guys miss. I mean, he had to in reality, he had to have 24 missed tackles forced in this game. Roschon Johnson at least was in the double digits by my count. Roschon Johnson is obviously a vocal leader for this team, but Bijan Robinson is also one of the leaders of this offense. And man, they showed why in this game. Xavier Worthy was really big. There were a few missed PI calls on him that were pretty egregious, and that's tended to happen this season. Iowa State, you could tell, was double covering him throughout the game on really anything intermediate or deep. He made them pay on some short intermediate throws behind the line of scrimmage. He was good. Finished up, I believe, 8 catches, 72 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He had one touchdown where he beat his DB. Nice throw from Quinn Ewers. The other one was that late one that I was talking about earlier. That it was the game-winning touchdown for Texas. That was just a beautiful route run by Xavier Worthy. Absolutely beautiful. and Quinn Ewers found him wide open. He had two guys that were over on that side of the field in coverage. And in that frame, you could easily not told that there was a single person in the area just because that was a textbook route. Beautiful, beautiful route from Xavier Worthy. Turning the attention to the defensive side of the ball, Texas defense, there was some positive, but mostly negative in this game because Iowa State was averaging, I believe, under 14 points per game coming into this one. They had scored 20 points in the previous two games combined. Texas' defense looked ironically, Texas' defense had held West Virginia and Oklahoma to 20 points combined in the last 2 weeks. They didn't look as good. Xavier Hutchinson was an issue, but the fact that Jalen Noel was also an issue is not good for Texas's secondary. If you want to blame Ryan Watts going out of the game early, I'm sure that had some impact, but I don't find much of an excuse for giving up 94 receiving yards. What was that? 2 touchdowns to Jalen Noel. He's not a bad receiver. He's a decent slot receiver, but under 300 receiving yards coming into this game. This was his best game of the season by far, and he broke some. He had that, I think it was second or third touchdown in this game first and second touchdowns to this game. The second touchdown was a long play. It was just an intermediate route across the middle that he broke for a touchdown. I would have to go back and watch the film to see who he shook off for that touchdown, but that's not what you want to see when, at that point in the game, Iowa State didn't have much of a ground game going. Texas secondary needs to be a little bit more shored up. That play, I believe they were sitting back in zone. And at that point, you have to be able to close on that receiver and bring him to the ground. Jalen Noel is very fast, and he is able to make guys miss in space if you're not taking a good approach and you're not getting a good read on where he's going. But yeah, I don't know that Jalen Noel, the way he was able to pick apart, or the way that he was able to get through, and Hunter Dekkers was able to find and pick apart this Texas secondary is going to be something to watch moving forward. I think a little bit of this had to do with Ryan Watts exiting the game early, and you saw a lot of snaps for Austin Jordan, true freshman corner, who was getting, again, a lot of work at boundary corner. And so a tough spot for him to come in. But the safeties weren't very good in pass coverage. The linebackers were okay. Deshaun Jameson, I thought, played pretty well. But, Xavier Hutchinson, as he does with pretty much every defense, definitely had his way. And then I'll get into that here. Xavier Hutchinson finishes up the game, 10 catches, 154 receiving yards, no touchdowns, but definitely could have had one. He had a late drop in this game. There was about at least a 40-yard pass from Hunter Dekkers right into his hands. He tries to jump up, catch the ball, and as he's coming down, the contact with the ground ends up forcing the ball out. And I know that Xavier Hutchinson had 3 drops against Kansas State last week, and I know 1 or 2 of those weren't good, but I'd have to say I think this is his biggest drop of the season. I might be incorrect on that, but if he catches that ball, Iowa State might be winning that game. I think that ended up being the most crucial drop. Granted, there was one from Texas wide receiver Casey Kane. There was a ball that was right into his hands on a second or third down play from Quinn Ewers, and the throw was great. There were some bad throws in this game from Quinn Ewers, no doubt, but that play was critical. That would have got the Texas offense moving down the field. But again, bad drop from Casey Kane. That was one that you'd like to see him come up with. He'd only been targeted a few times in the last few games, but he definitely, I don't think he's had any drops this season prior to this game. And if he did, definitely not one that bad. So those were 2 critical drops, but the Xavier Hutchinson one was a lot more impactful. Just the stage of that game, he was wide open downfield. It was pretty good throw from Hunter Dekkers, who had some nice throws in this game. And so that play was huge. But I will still come back to the fact that this Texas secondary allowing almost 250 receiving yards, 2 scores between Jalen Noel and Xavier Hutchinson. Iowa State had, what did they fit? Hunter Dekkers had a pretty big day. 329, 2 touchdowns. Prior to today, I don't think that Hunter Dekkers, at least against a Power 5 team, came anywhere close to mustering something of that level. Yeah, this was the first time this season, even against Southeast Missouri State, that Hunter Deckers went over 300 passing yards. So that is a major blemish for the Texas secondary. And really the entire defense, because the pass rush, it was okay, but they weren't picking on the areas that they needed to. These Iowa State offensive tackles aren't very good. The interior of the offensive line is pretty good, but the offensive tackles are responsible for some 60 or 70% of the pressures that have come on Hunter Deckers this season. And that was largely the case again today. I thought Moro Ijomo was pretty good, really good, but otherwise, Overshown was getting some pressure. I like that they involved him more as a pass rusher, but he didn't really get home at all. You still saw a lot of the same issues with Ovia Gofu, where he's just getting too far up the field, and then Hunter Deckers is able to go through the middle. Kind of that issue on the touchdown run late. That was the final touchdown for Iowa State, where you just kind of had the seized part in the middle for Hunter Deckers. He ends up running up the middle. I believe that was Diamante Tucker Dorsey in the middle. They can't catch up with him, and he has a clear lane right to the end zone. So to some degree, definitely dual threat quarterbacks, because Hunter Deckers is pretty mobile. They're still giving Texas issues. And in the next few weeks, you've got, or at least the next few games, you have a lot of dual threat quarterbacks on the schedule. You've still got Adrian Martinez with Kansas State a few weeks down the line. You have Spencer Sanders, who is a capable runner next weekend when you face Oklahoma State. Blake Shapen is still a capable runner. We'll see what his health is like, but there's some very capable dual threat quarterbacks, or at least capable runners left on the schedule. TCU with Max Duggan. So hope to see that the edge rushers are cleaning up in the backfield a little bit more, because it's still the interior of the defensive line that is wreaking a lot of the havoc for the front seven. It's not Barron Sorrell. It's not Ovia Gofu. Justice Finkley was getting in the game a little bit this week or last weekend, but obviously not as much of an impact this weekend. So, man, I will say this: Iowa State, they're no joke. It's unfortunate for them, not just the injury to Hunter Deckers, which is they've now lost their last 3 games by a combined 7 points, and even going back to the Baylor loss, they lost that one by 7 points with some tough breaks. Where, if I could say, I would say it was closer than a 7-point game. If not, Iowa State playing better than Baylor. So a lot of respect to them and the way that they were able to just kind of play their brand of football. There's a lot of things that Matt Campbell came up with in this game that gave Texas a lot of trouble. I mean, that 3-3 stack defense for Iowa State gave Ewers fits. He finishes the game with less than 160 passing yards. Yeah, he had 3 touchdowns, but not as good as he was against Alabama in that first quarter, against Oklahoma last weekend, which I figured that would be the case, but I didn't think the drop-off would be that steep. And yeah, I mean, the last thing I would say is a lot of the things that Matt Campbell did on offense were, well, Tom Manning, but yeah, that staff that they did on offense were pretty impressive. Some of those bunch trips formations, so the right and to the left, were causing confusion in Texas's secondary and with the linebackers. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't mention this earlier. The Jalen Ford interception in the red zone was a critical play early in that game, completely swung the momentum. So that was a huge play too. Wanted to throw that in there because it was just too impactful to not mention. Anyway, that is pretty much it. We will be coming back, I'm sure, talking a lot more about this game because there's a lot to dissect. And hopefully turning the page soon for this Texas team and more to look forward to in the near future. There's a big game next week against Oklahoma State, but we will come back again discussing more on that for the Hook 'em Horn show next week. We'll probably be recording on Monday or Tuesday and then getting that up hopefully by Wednesday. The one up this week was a little bit late, running into some editing issues, but again, hopefully we're finding something a little bit better in terms of posting time next week. That's pretty much it. So yeah.